Hello, everyone. Welcome back. I am Kris. This is the most gangster general of America of the American Revolution, Daniel Morgan. This is part 2. Before we get started, click, clack, and then you can click on this if you'd like to donate to the channel. Request a video. Your name sponsors that video. All right. Quick intro. Let's get back into part 2.
But I'm not giving up to him with a sword, and gives his sword to the priest and says, I'll give it to you, but I'm not giving it to any of these scoundrels. And they take Daniel Morgan and the rest of his men into custody. Okay, and just so we're all clear, historically speaking, this is a complete and utter disaster. This is the Continental Army's first major defeat. 30 Americans have just been killed, and another 431 have been taken prisoner. From here, Daniel Morgan...
Okay, sorry about that. My phone just kept going off.
Spends almost an entire year as a prisoner of war, and it's important to understand at this point in time that a lot of the British military officers and the United States Continental Army officers all know each other, because almost all of the United States Continental Army officers used to be British officers, so like they're acquainted. A lot of them have met. They're well aware of who Daniel Morgan is. They know about Benedict Arnold, General George Washington. They all know each other. So they go up to Daniel Morgan and they're like, hey, hear me out. We'll give you a pardon, so you're innocent, and then we'll make you a colonel in the British military if you trade sides and come work with us because you're awesome. At this point, Daniel Morgan, remembering the 499 scars on his back, is like, nah, I'm good. Don't insult me again. And he just sits out the entire year as a POW until he gets traded back to the American forces in January of 1777. So Daniel Morgan gets traded back, and he, is waiting around for orders, trying to figure out what's going on. Apparently, George Washington had petitioned Congress to end up making Daniel Morgan a colonel, which is incredible news to him because he thought he was going to get kicked out or thrown in jail or reprimanded because he surrendered. This was America's first surrender, and it was technically his fault under his command. He was not expecting good news when he got released back to the Americans, but he ended up getting made a colonel. So at this point, Daniel Morgan is pumped, right? He's going to get to go fight the British again. He's got a promotion. Everything's going great. George Washington says, hey, I stood up this new unit. It's called the Provisional Rifle Corps. You're going to be the commander of it. They're all carrying rifles. None of them are carrying muskets. Okay, and here's the important context of understanding this unit. This unit, to anybody other than Daniel Morgan, would be considered a punishment, and I'm not sure if George Washington meant it that way or not, but Daniel Morgan was happy about it either way. Now, the reason this unit was a punishment was because none of the other high-ranking officers liked having riflemen in their formations. They preferred all their soldiers to be carrying muskets. Now, if you know anything about guns, that sounds completely counterintuitive because everybody knows that rifles are better than muskets because rifles have rifling, which causes the bullet to spin, making it go further and be more accurate. Okay, but we're looking at this with the benefit of hindsight. We understand what firearms are going to evolve into and what battle doctrine is going to evolve into.
Yeah, they're wanting guys who are going to stand in a line, musket, and fire. You got a guy who can work a rifle. He can climb up in a tree, take his shot, hop down, reload. That's not gentlemanly, Leo. Like that. They need people to stand in formation and die for no reason.
That hasn't really been designed or figured out yet, so the common battle doctrine of the day is to have your men march in a very tight formation, shoulder to shoulder, up to another group of guys standing shoulder to shoulder, kind of aim your musket in their general direction, pull the trigger, reload as fast as you can, and pull the trigger again until all the bad guys are gone. And if that's the type of warfare you're trying to conduct, the musket actually is kind of better because the rifle's a little bit more complicated. It takes longer to reload, so your formation is firing less ammunition, even though it is more accurate, but then your formation also isn't as tightly grouped because all the riflemen are trying to get some elbow room to actually take aim, so it's more of a scattered formation too. So a lot of the other more traditional military officers that are more well-versed in the conventional battle doctrine of the day absolutely hated riflemen. So for that reason, George Washington took almost all of them that he had, stuck them in one unit, and then gave them to Daniel Morgan. Upon assuming command of the Provisional Rifle Corps, Daniel Morgan also gets orders directly from George Washington himself, and in those orders it says, and I quote, "The approach of the enemy in that quarter has made a further reinforcement necessary, and I know of no other corps so likely to check their progress in proportion to its number than that under your command. I have great dependence upon you." Okay, I'm going to say that again, but slower. Check their progress in proportion to your number, okay? That's George Washington fancy officer speak for, hey, Daniel Morgan, that undignified guerrilla warfare stuff that you do, go do more of it. Okay, if you're not picking up what I'm putting down, I'm trying to tell you that George Washington himself has just pulled the pin on the fuckery grenade that is Daniel Morgan and the Provisional Rifle Corps and thrown it at the British with no orders other than go win. From here, Daniel Morgan and the Provisional Rifle Corps go on a guerrilla warfare rampage, shutting down supply lines, picking off officers, doing absolutely everything they can to hamper the British war machine. Okay, and just so we're on the same page, because I really need you to understand this, it's the big takeaway from the video, okay? In the pop culture zeitgeist about the American Revolutionary War, there's something called the American Rifleman myth, and that's basically the pop culture movie Hollywood understanding that America won the Revolutionary War because all of the Americans, the Continental military, the militias, absolutely everybody was a bunch of riflemen hiding in the tree line, picking off the British one at a time. That's not necessarily true by any stretch of the imagination. The Continental military of the United States, in large, fought exactly like the British fought. They got in formations, they marched right up with muskets, stood there, and fired at each other.
And they did that because that was the gentleman way to fight, and George Washington wanted to be a British gentleman, a British military guy, and so he wanted all of his guys to fight the same way. But they learned the tactics through the French and Indian War that they don't fight that way. Your opponent, by they, I mean the French Indian, don't fight that way. They hide behind trees. They take pot shots. They load their that really didn't look good, did it? They load their musket while hiding behind a tree and then pop back out or run to a new tree. It was, we weren't going to beat the British fighting the way they fight. It wasn't going to happen. Just didn't matter. They were trained, they were paid to fight that way. We weren't. And our guys looked at it like, I could flee and just sneak back home. Pretend I had nothing to do with this. And I don't care. I'm technically a British citizen now. What's going to change? Nothing. These other people are going to get killed. I'm going to go back to living the way I am. So it was, we couldn't fight that way.
So the American Rifleman myth, or the pop culture understanding of the Revolutionary War that everybody was a rifleman hiding in the tree line, is actually heavily influenced by the militias. You know, people like Francis Marion, the Swamp Fox, doing what he was doing down in South Carolina. But more so, it comes from Daniel Morgan and Morgan's rifles. Okay, and the key and very important difference here is that the militias are just that. They're militias. It's literally a bunch of dudes from one area that got together and are like, hey, I don't like these dudes in the red coats. Let's go do something about it. And they're not expected to necessarily fight by the rules of warfare. They're just a bunch of civilians that took up arms and went to go fight.
I would kill me some redcoats.
I believe you would.
In contrast to that, the Provisional Rifle Corps is part of the Continental Army. The men that comprise it are not a bunch of farmers that grabbed their musket from over the fireplace and went to war. No, these are professional soldiers that have been trained how to fight in warfare, and then they got grouped together and sent out to conduct asymmetrical warfare against the enemy. In a lot of ways, Morgan's rifles are America's first special forces unit.
Spartans! What is your profession?
And because of this, Morgan's rifles gains a lot of notoriety and honestly a lot of hatred from the British because it's a completely different tone, right? When the militia behaves this way, that's one thing. They're the irregular, non-professional fighting force that just took up arms. They're going to do whatever they're going to do. They don't really have any oversight. But when Morgan's rifles, an official part of the Continental Army, the professional military, behaves this way, it sends the message to the British of like, hey, we're in this to win no matter what. We're going to get it done. Okay, if you're not picking up what I'm putting down, I'm trying to tell you that Daniel Morgan and the Provisional Rifle Corps are a huge part of the reason that America has the attitude towards warfare that it does. That if you're not cheating, you're not trying, and it's never a war crime the first time, especially if you win.
But if you have one unit, several units that fight this kind of, I don't want to call it guerrilla warfare, but they don't fight, they unconventional warfare, right? Because the British like to line up. These guys didn't. So if you encounter groups, you don't know how many. If you're the British, you don't know how many of these groups exist. But if you fight one or two of them, and then you come across a group that has an open battlefield and there's trees in the way, you're going to be doing this. But you're also going to be peeking around looking at those trees because they've got into your mind that this may not be the enemy that you're fighting. They may be lined up. Maybe they take their shot, and then the behind a tree pops out a group of people who are now going to take your shot from the flank. So you could shoot these people, yeah, but you could shoot these people, sure, but you got these guys who are better marksmen on both sides. And all you got to do is have that happen a few times, and now you are just, your head's on that swivel. You're looking at this group, but you're thinking, there's a ridge right there. They could be laying on the other side of that ridge, pointing weapons at us in the tall grass. They could be behind these trees over here. And then you can start building up that psyche.
The guerrilla warfare goes on for a couple of months, and then by September of 1777, the British have sent down an army under the command of General Burgoyne to go south and cut the American colonies essentially in half, which will divide the two, and they will divide and conquer, surely leading to a British victory. This absolutely...
So in the first video, when they went to Canada, this was what I was thinking of when I said they were divide and conquer. I'm thinking divide here. You have the North up there doing their thing in Canada, right? Who cares about them? You go south because that's where Washington is and stuff like that. If you could land him, that's going to take out the big chunk, the big resistance. But, this is what I was thinking. Just divide that.
cannot happen. So Horatio Gates and Daniel Morgan are going to go stop him at a place called Saratoga. And right out of the gate, Morgan and his riflemen go out and ensure that the Americans are winning before the battle even starts. They begin harassing the British, and on top of that, and more importantly, they end up taking out all the British scouts before they can report back on what the terrain of this battlefield even looks like. So when the battle does start, the Americans are going to have an understanding of the terrain and the British are not, giving the Americans a huge advantage. Because of this, when the battle does finally kick off at a place called Freeman's Farm, the most forward British unit, being led by General Simon Fraser, directly tries to attack Morgan's riflemen. And it is on paper a British victory. Essentially what ends up happening is Morgan's riflemen managed to pick off almost all of the officers in his entire unit and like 75% of the artillerymen, and then they just run back into the woods and retreat. But the British did end up taking the land that Morgan's men were defending, so they won the battle. Then, like a week later at the next major engagement, Daniel Morgan sees General Simon Fraser riding into battle on his horse, orders one of his men to scale a tree and take out this general. He does, the shot lands, General Simon Fraser is killed. This is a humongous hit to the British military. According to myth, this shot was taken by the legendary American rifleman Timothy Murphy. However, a lot of historians have come out and said that they have no evidence to even believe that he was on this battlefield at all, let alone being the man that took the shot that killed General Fraser. However, we do know for sure that it was one of Daniel Morgan's men. While Morgan and his men are picking people off from the woodline, General Horatio Gates and Benedict Arnold take control of the conventional forces, lead them into battle, and start taking the fight to the British, and they actually start winning. And then at some point, Morgan's men get eyes on General Burgoyne, and they start trying to pick him off as well. So General Burgoyne is standing there watching his superior British military falter as he's taking gunfire directly. Morgan's men end up hitting his horse. They get a round that goes through his jacket, barely missing him, and then another round hits his hat, somehow missing him as well. At this point, General Burgoyne is like, fuck this, we gotta fall back. So the British fall back, they consolidate their position, they're trying to figure out what to do. General Burgoyne comes to the conclusion he's just gonna have to retreat from this battlefield. So he sends out scouts to start figuring out where the fuck all the Americans are, because remember, Morgan and his men were taking out all the scouts, so they don't know the battlefield, they don't know where the Americans are, they're trying to find a route to get out of this fight. And at the same time, Morgan and his riflemen sneak around the backside of the British, and they're able to pick off all of these scouts looking for an escape route, meaning that Burgoyne interprets this as he is completely surrounded and he is forced to surrender. Okay, this is arguably the most important victory in American history, because America winning at Saratoga is the first time that the Americans beat an actual British army in its entirety on the battlefield and forced them to surrender. This is the reason that the French felt compelled to back the United States as a whole and go against the British in the first place, agreeing to send reinforcements. If it wasn't for Saratoga, the French would have never have helped and America would have never become its own country. And while not all of the credit for this victory goes to Daniel Morgan and his riflemen, a disproportionate amount of it does. And this is why the commemorative painting of the Battle of Saratoga, the surrender of General Burgoyne, shows General Burgoyne surrendering to General Horatio Gates, with Daniel Morgan pretty much up front and center, being a giant compared to everybody else, dressed in all white.
Don't you know you're not supposed to wear white after Labor Day?
After the Battle of Saratoga, Morgan and his riflemen go back up north to help General George Washington. They don't really partake in any major battles. Instead, George Washington just kind of lets them off the leash to go conduct and carry out guerrilla warfare against the British wherever they can. This takes place all throughout 1778, primarily around New Jersey. And while all that's going on, a couple of things happen that really piss off Daniel Morgan, primarily that he gets passed up for promotion on 2 separate occasions so that some other officer can become a general before him, even though those officers were far less qualified and had delivered far less results than Daniel Morgan. Couple of reasons Daniel Morgan got passed up for promotion. 1, he carries out undignified warfare. 2, he doesn't come from a wealthy aristocratic family. He's literally a homeless kid from Virginia that has somehow become a colonel in the Continental Army. He should be happy where he's already at. They don't want to let him into the general's club. And 3, Daniel Morgan doesn't really play the politics game, which is what you have to do to become a general at this point in time. Daniel Morgan thinks that his results should speak for themselves. Unfortunately, it just doesn't seem to work that way. And this
Yeah, there were people who thought, hey, look, I've done well. I deserve something more. And the American military just didn't do that yet. It was more about who you knew instead of what you did, unfortunately.
is all very important to Daniel Morgan because remember, he's always got that chip on his shoulder about wanting more and more status. He's that poor kid from West Virginia that wanted to be one of the elite. So when he keeps getting passed up for this promotion for people that are less qualified than him, it absolutely infuriates him to the point that he ends up quitting and resigning his post in the United States Continental Army. So that's what he does. He literally says, fuck you guys, I quit, and goes back home to Frederick County, Virginia to run his farm. And while he's there running his farm, they are begging him to come back on multiple occasions. Everybody's asking him. George Washington, Horatio Gates, they all want Daniel Morgan to come back. And the situation becomes so dire that General Horatio Gates actually rides out to basically beg Daniel Morgan to take his job back in person, right? Because if anybody knows how good Daniel Morgan actually is, it's General Horatio Gates, right? Because Horatio Gates at this point in time is praised as the genius of Saratoga that led the American Continental Army into battle and turned the tide of the entire war against the British. But in reality, Horatio Gates knows that Daniel Morgan is the motherfucker that's actually responsible for that, and they need him in the fight. To this, Daniel Morgan is like, yeah, I'll come back, sure, absolutely, but I'm only going to do it if you make me a general. To which Horatio Gates is like, Congress has to approve that. I don't know if I can get it done. I'll try for you, but I can't promise anything. To which Daniel Morgan is like, cool, okay, well, go try and let me know how that goes. I'll be waiting here. To which Horatio Gates is like, fuck, okay, just come back and I guarantee you I will get Congress to push this through and you will become a general. If so facto, Daniel Morgan gets promoted to brigadier general and he is back in this fight. Daniel Morgan and his men get put under the command of my other favorite Revolutionary War general, George Washington's right-hand man, Nathaniel Greene, aka the Fighting Quaker. Now, I don't want to turn this into a Nathaniel Greene video, so we're just going to go ahead and say that Nathaniel Greene is a truly exceptional general and also very, very important to the Revolutionary War, and one of the things that he understands is to let people do what they're good at, and that is why he gives Daniel Morgan the orders to take his men and become a flying army in South Carolina. His orders are essentially to never engage in pitched battle, run around in the backwoods of South Carolina, and fuck up the British's day. And that's exactly what Daniel Morgan does. He gets to it immediately. It doesn't take long before the British figure out, fuck, that Daniel Morgan guy's back and he's ruining everything. So the British, realizing they have to do
Give me just a second. Okay, sorry about that.
something to stop Daniel Morgan and his men, send in one of their best guys with his unit, Bannister Tarleton. This guy, in many ways, is the British equivalent of Daniel Morgan. He does...
The Butcher is what he's called. He was around the Waxhaw area when future 7th President Andrew Jackson lived around there. And, yeah, Andrew Jackson did not speak highly of his childhood growing up around during the Revolutionary War with Bannister the Butcher Tarleton running around just murdering. Is it all true? Probably not. Was he a bad guy? To the Americans, sure. To the British, they probably love the guy. You know what I mean?
Not like pitched battle. He prefers guerrilla warfare tactics. The only real difference here is that Daniel Morgan is the poor kid that developed tactics and earned his way up the ladder, whereas Bannister Tarleton came from this wealthy aristocratic family and daddy bought him his commission as an officer. So he doesn't really have the same amount of experience and ability, and he makes up for it by being overtly aggressive and extremely brutal. Just so we're on the same page, this is literally the guy that Malfoy's dad from the movie The Patriot is portraying in that movie. Prior to being sent to engage Daniel Morgan, Tarleton was engaging Francis Marion, aka the Swamp Fox, the other guy that inspired Mel Gibson's character in The Patriot. While engaging Francis Marion and Daniel Morgan in South Carolina, he was known to be unnecessarily harsh to civilians by confiscating livestock, forcing people to board his soldiers in their homes. In addition to that, he is also accused of slaughtering a bunch of Continental troops after they surrendered at what is known as a Beaufort Massacre. Now, that's the American perspective, but the British perspective was that Tarleton was an extremely effective officer, and the unit that he had under his command was referred to as the Legion. They were highly mobile, and they were regarded as one of the best units in the British military, especially in the South under the command of General Cornwallis. I mean,
All right.
this is it. This is a headliner, right? This is shaping up to be the coolest battle of the American Revolution. In the red, white, and blue corner, we've got America's flying army under the command of Daniel Morgan, a literal giant that has defied death after being sentenced to 500 lashes and defied death again after being shot in the face with a musket ball. The poor kid that came from nothing that appears to be an unstoppable force on his way to the top. And then in the tea and crumpets corner, we have the British Legion being led into battle by Bannister Tarleton, known for his highly effective aggression and brutality. Two of the only and very best asymmetrical warfare units of their time, the special forces of their day, going head to head in South Carolina. And it all comes to a head January 17, 1781 at the Battle of Cowpens. After playing cat and mouse with Tarleton for months, Daniel Morgan has decided he's going to throw his adversary a curveball. He is going to try to engage him in pitched battle, something neither of them are known for. For this battle, Daniel Morgan picks a location known as the Cowpens because it's like the inside of a cow's pen. It is a muddy, swampy, nasty fucking mess. And the reason this land is such a muddy, swampy mess is because it's situated right in between two rivers, a location that Daniel Morgan picked for the very specific reason of going against Tarleton. You see, about half of Daniel Morgan's force is comprised of militia. Militia is not good at pitched battle. They're known for firing one volley and then all running off and fleeing. They're not good at it. They're not reliable. They're not trained soldiers. And Daniel Morgan knows that, so by situating them in between two rivers, it's going to make retreating impossible, and it's going to force the militia to stand and fight. And Daniel Morgan knows that Tarleton is going to know exactly what Daniel Morgan is doing. So the way that Tarleton is going to receive this is going to be, Daniel Morgan honestly thinks in his arrogance that he can situate his militia between two rivers, forcing them to not retreat, and they're going to be able to stand up against me and the British Legion? Absolutely not. He is baiting Tarleton into fighting him head on. And Tarleton is obviously going to take the bait. So the night before the battle, Daniel Morgan decides he needs to let everybody in on this strategy that he's got cooked up, and he's got to hype up the men. He's got to get them ready and excited for battle. So Daniel Morgan, the at this point legendary military general known for his undignified guerrilla warfare tactics, is walking around the camp hyping up his men, shirtless, carrying a sword, showing off all the scars on his back, telling his men, we're fucking up the British tomorrow. Bear in mind, this dude is 6'2". He's essentially a giant among men, and he's walking around with all the scars proving that he's defied death multiple times, telling his guys we're gonna win.
And I will make sure that this never happens to anyone else again.
Okay, the men are pumped. They're being led into battle by Daniel Morgan. Andrew Pickens, the legendary militiaman, is leading the militia, and we've got George Washington's cousin here on horseback. There's no way we're gonna lose. We've got way too many main characters. So the day of the battle, they're pumped. They're ready to go. They get into the formation exactly how Daniel Morgan told them to, and as Tarleton's forces come up, Tarleton realizes that Daniel Morgan, either in an incredible display of stupidity or arrogance, has stuck his militia in the center of his formation.
Unless I'm dreaming, I believe I see militia forming at their center.
No traditionally trained military officer would ever even remotely consider putting their militia in the center, because if they flee, the entire formation is going to collapse within itself, and that's it, game over. That's why you put the militia out on the side on one of the flanks, and then if one of your flanks disintegrates, I mean, it sucks, but it's not the end of the world. It's the difference between getting shot in the arm and getting shot directly in the chest. So Daniel Morgan has effectively done the exact opposite of what anybody would recommend he should do by having the militia in the center and the Continental forces on the flanks.
Yeah, Art of War war, fight the enemy where they aren't. After all these years, it finally just clicked.
But that's not what it means.
Really?
And Tarleton, in his default hyper-aggressiveness, is going to show Daniel Morgan the fatal flaw that he had just committed as soon as this battle kicks off. Tarleton orders the Legion to attack the American formation head-on, attempting to scatter the militia at its center, collapsing the American formation, and taking the battlefield immediately. As the British Legion approaches the American formation head-on, the American militiamen fire a volley. The British continue to advance. The militiamen fire a second volley. It does not stop the British. They continue to advance. At which point, the militia members break ranks, they turn around, and they flee, just like they were ordered to by Daniel Morgan last night. The militia members begin running up a small hill behind them, and as Tarleton sees that the American formation is collapsing in its center, just like he knew it would, he orders the British to bayonet charge and break ranks. The British Legionnaires chase them down at a dead sprint, trying to catch the Americans. They lose sight of the militiamen momentarily as they go down the backside of the hill, and as the Legionnaires reach the top of the hill, they have the biggest oh fuck moment in the American Revolution. What the now out of ranks, out of formation horde of British soldiers see is that the American militiamen are now reformed up with an additional 600 Continental soldiers formed up directly behind them in what is now a massive wall of musket fire, as the original flanks of the formation turn and box them in, and William Washington's dragoons pull up on the rear side of the battlefield, boxing them in entirely.
Did that go the way you thought it was going to go? Nope.
The Americans open fire with one humongous volley before launching a counter bayonet charge and crushing the British Legion in a matter of minutes. Over 86% of the entire military force has been killed or captured. If the Battle of Saratoga wasn't the most pivotal moment in the Revolutionary War, the Battle of Cowpens was. Daniel Morgan has effectively just hit the British Empire with the rope-a-dope. Bannister Tarleton did end up getting away, but with his legion effectively obliterated, the British military was essentially crippled and would never recover. After the Battle of Cowpens, General Nathaniel Greene would confront General Cornwallis, utilizing the exact same tactic that General Morgan had created, and it was effective yet again, forcing Cornwallis to fall back to Yorktown, where he would remain until the French showed up in Chesapeake Bay, laying siege to Yorktown, effectively ending the American Revolutionary War with America the victor.
America! Fuck yeah!
Daniel Morgan would return back home, his body effectively worn out. He would be riddled with chronic illness and chronic pain for the remainder of his life. To commemorate his victory at Cowpens and the pivotal role that he played in the American Revolution, in 1790, the United States Congress gifted Daniel Morgan a one-of-a-kind gold medal depicting his victory at Cowpens with the inscription, "Victory, the Defender of Liberty," on the back. This is worth noting, they obviously didn't have the Medal of Honor back then. I'm assuming that having Congress strike you a one-of-a-kind medal made out of gold is on par with the Medal of Honor, but I'm not really sure. Then in 1794, Daniel Morgan would be brought back into service very briefly to lead troops to stop the Whiskey Rebellion. And then again in 1794, he would make one last contribution to the historical record, aka the Frederick County Court Files, when he was in trouble for breaking a man's jaw in a bar fight when he was 59 years old. He would then get to go back home, live out the rest of his life with his wife Abigail before passing away in 1802. And that is the story of America's most gangster general from the Revolutionary War, the undignified guerrilla, Daniel Morgan. Thank you for watching. Best way to support the channel is go buy some merch over at thefatelectrician.com. Quack bang, out.
Oh, wait a minute.
Undignified gorilla is 1,000% going on a shirt.
Yeah, Nathaniel Greene, side note on him, he died after the Revolutionary War. Washington became so the war ended in 1783. Washington became president in 1789. Did he die in 1786? 85, 86 from, was it sunstroke? Heat exhaustion? I don't remember now. Sunstroke? He was a young guy too. He was a young guy. And Nathaniel Greene and Henry Knox are two guys that Washington... Knox, was Knox the book owner, or was that Greene? The bookstore owner? Fudge, I mix them both up. Anyways, he picked both those guys from like obscurity in a way. And It was a good pick. Anyways, it's not about them. Just Nathaniel Green was mentioned, so I just wanted to kind of tag that one. Okay. And then Washington died in 1799. So Daniel Morgan is 1802. It's good, you know. 1802. 1802. 1802, was 1802 also the year when Hamilton died from the duel with Burr? Was that 1804? I don't remember. It's not important. All right. Well, I hope you enjoyed. I did. When I saw the thumbnail of this video and it said Daniel Morgan, I was thinking the Swamp Fox. So I was kind of thrown off a little bit because he said the name and I already forgot. But he said the name and I was like, that's a Swamp Fox. And then it was, oh. One of those late reactions. Okay, well, I'm going to end this here. I hope you enjoyed. And until next time, have a good day, have a good night.